Hey everyone, today's episode is about urban adventures in D&D and TTRPG. Niels and I discuss what makes urban adventures so much fun and how to make the different parts, the city and the adventure, click together to create an incredible, engaging and fun adventure. The city is not just a backdrop, it's a lively place filled with people and points of interest. And that needs to reflect in your adventure planning and your adventure running. But more on that in the episode itself. I also want to highlight what is roleplay anyway, once again, because it's finally out in podcast format. You can now listen to a 2-hour-long discussion around role-playing and characters in your podcasting app right here. Just go to our good friend Roleplay chat after this episode and you should find the episode right there. And with that, let's hop straight into episode 84 and let's chat about making your TTRPGs better and how to create your next urban adventure. Well, hello everyone and welcome to episode 84 of DoubleDM. I am, as always, your host Emil, and I am joined today by none other, the one and only Niels of DoubleDM.
Hey yo, how are you doing today? Good.
Hey yo, hey yo, fellow cool kid podcast. How are you doing today?
I can't complain really. Just thinking about what my sword for tomorrow will look like because
it's September, right?
Exactly. Yeah, I'm a bit more active on Twitter lately because of that. And
I've seen. I'm happy to every time I see them on Twitter. I haven't been active for the last 2 days or something. Really, I'm happy to always retweet them, obviously, because obviously it's also your art, and this is your show, so it kind of feels like I take nearly 80% of all the social media presence anyway. So why not obviously give you the retweets if you even get to posting, because I'm the only one of this team that really uses Twitter or anything really. Yeah, on social media. So how's September going for you?
Actually pretty well. The start and the last couple of days were a bit tough because my family is here right now. Part of my family from Hamburg. So getting to juggle drawing, meeting with the family, but I still enjoy both parts, but it's sometimes tough to keep up.
Yeah, I totally get that, right?
But yeah, it is a lot of fun. Mm-hmm. And I think I can get some cool magic items out of this for some campaigns.
And if you want to post those on our Twitter, you can do as well.
Yeah, once they're finished, then this will definitely happen. But
your week's only been September and family.
Yeah, mostly.
That sounds like it's basically the whole week anyway.
Exactly.
So how was my week? Well, I had a session on Tuesday, I had a session on Thursday, I will have a session on Sunday. Yeah, so that's what my week has been and will be. So the first session was the Tyranny of Dragons session, and my players are still kind of tied into this. A noble has been murdered by his brother. The brother is a cultist. He has been imprisoned into a special cell under special supervision by the lords and ladies of Waterdeep. The players need to get to him before he gets executed or sent off to a different land where he gets executed, and all of that type of stuff. So there's a lot happening. There's a lot of stuff happening right now. My players did two things. They convinced not the lords of Waterdeep directly, but people working for the lords, that it's good if the players get to speak to that prisoner before he gets executed or sent off.
Yeah.
What they want. Perfect. Second of all, they also eradicated the last cultists in Waterdeep now.
Okay.
Since one of the big cultists, the brother, was captured, many cultists fled the city because we've been made, right? Get out of here. Abandoned. But a few people have stayed in Waterdeep, obviously to keep a base of operations and keep tabs on everything. And my players found those, laid a trap, and now captured them or killed them in a fight, which was very cool because I got to use, for example, the Dragon Blast step block from Fistbands, which I really loved in that fight. Mainly because it downed 3 of my players basically in round 2.
Okay.
That fight was very close, but my players won.
Perfect.
That was the first session. I also had a session on Sunday. I had many sessions the last few days. That was my Phantoms of Chaos game on Sunday. My players went back to a city, got their rewards and all of that stuff, then were tied into a thievery in a temple. Like we will talk about in this episode. And yeah, they got to a point where they know the thief is gonna be at a masked ball. Actually, the thief has invited the players to the masked ball.
Okay.
And basically said, come and get me if you can. And now my players are left figuring out, okay, who is this? Can we catch them before the ball? And what do we need to know about the ball? Then they're gonna have the ball. And I'm gonna have a lot of fun next time we play with that ball and getting my players to, well, run around in circles in a place where they probably won't feel that comfortable as characters, not as players, but as characters, because none of them really are part of this sophisticated, noble, rich people social hierarchy. They are a fighter, a monk from a monastery, a gnome artificer that went to university, and they also have the son of a very high mage at the academy. But none of them really do attend these kind of situations. So it's gonna be very fun to mess with them a bit in ways like, well, now do royal small talk. So that's fun. And now this Thursday, we also ended one of our adventures in our campaign. Okay, so we have one more adventure really to go before we are at a point where we probably will make decisions depending on, do we want to play these characters further, or do we retire them because, well, they've achieved everything, or do we play further and go on more adventures with these characters and this type of stuff, right? We beat one BBEG, and now there's a second one that kind of wants to become the mage of all mages. He has this weird medallion or emblem that if he crafts it and then uses it, he basically becomes I don't know what the title is, but basically the title is he can control all magic everywhere.
Okay.
He has full control over magic, and that's fucking bad.
Yeah,
Especially if he's also engaging in activities with demons.
Especially then,
summoning them, making deals with them, not so good. So yeah, but also one of our players is becoming an archmage, which in this game is basically the highest a mage can go, which is very fun. And there's a lot of other stuff as well, right? There's this Mage Con, and next time we play, it will be the opening ceremony of the exam to become an archmage.
Okay,
which is a very fun process because no one knows what's happening. The test changes every time, and there will be a procession to present these candidates and then send them behind closed doors. That's where the exam is being held. No one knows what's happening inside these doors except older archmages and the people that take the test.
Okay.
And sometimes these tests have a 90% chance of death.
Oh, okay. So completely safe.
Completely safe.
Yeah.
Completely safe. But yeah, that's kind of where I'm at with my sessions. That's basically all there is for my week. I didn't really have anything else. Well, yeah, on Sunday we both have a session as well.
Yeah.
But that's in the future. It's a new campaign by a friend of ours where we are gonna play 2 characters. So why don't you, Niels, tell me a little bit about your character if you want. Obviously, if you don't want, I can't ask you because we're both playing. But for the podcast, maybe you want to tell something.
Yeah, sure. I can at least tell you what I'm planning on playing. How it plays out in the campaign then is a completely different thing. But yeah, I try to play a introverted, stoic druid, you could say, where he's the son of the tribe leader right now, and has to fulfill some sort of ritual.
Okay.
He didn't get told what type of ritual it is, but just that he would know which ritual it would be when he found it.
I'm sensing Keyleth vibes, though. No shame, right? No shame to Marisha Ray also for the Keyleth backstory, but also that type of backstory is also a little bit basic, right?
Yeah, it is.
Also no shame to you, but right, Druid tribe wants to become leader, has to perform ritual, very easy storyline basically, but can be very fun. But no, I enjoy that. It's a very cool storyline. I think it's a very good way to get the character to adventure and to explore the world and get to know new things.
Exactly.
Because right, you never know what your real challenge is or what your real ritual is, so you just have to engage with everything to find it. That's very cool.
Yeah, and one side note, I am playing the new druid subclass, the primeval druid, so I'm all about dinosaurs and shit.
Oh, wait, which book did that came out
It's a UA, I think, right now. It's still a UA.
I didn't think that they would even produce UAs anymore. I thought they stopped like 3 months ago because of one D&D.
Yeah, I think it came out with the giant barbarian class, these things.
Yeah. Okay.
And now I have a dinosaur pet.
Oh my god.
Yeah.
That's fucking cool.
Yeah.
Okay, I enjoy that. I enjoy that a lot. I think it's very fun that you're playing a very introverted person because we have a lot of people with a 20 in charisma.
Yeah, let me check what my charisma score says, but I don't think it's...
I think it's your dumpster. That's what our GM told us when we talked about that. Because we have a warlock with 20 charisma, we have a rogue with 20 charisma, and we have a paladin with 20 charisma.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, charisma is definitely my dumpster with a score of 7. But now I gotta ask, tell me something about your character, please.
Okay, my character is that paladin with a 20 charisma. So I'm not gonna reveal too much about the backstory, but I'm just gonna say he is a cursed paladin.
Ooh, okay.
So basically his backstory goes, he has woken up and suddenly he was cursed with something. He doesn't know what, he doesn't know why, and then became a paladin because another paladin found him and trained him to use his powers for good, basically.
Mm-hmm.
And now he's an oath of the Watcher, I think.
Oh yeah, I like that.
To basically guard the people of the material plane against the forces of other planes, because in that campaign there's a lot about 6 different primeval forces, basically, that kind of wage war on this plane of existence. So he's basically anything from these 6 forces that hurt the people of this plane, I'm gonna eradicate it. Yeah. Doesn't matter which of the 6 it is, even though he was trained by the light themselves, which is one of the 6 forces.
Okay,
so
interesting.
And yeah, he's probably his charisma isn't used as a persuasion tool because he knows he isn't liked by many people for his curse. Because his curse shows in different ways.
Okay.
And that makes him feared by many because he's a cursed one. But he lives with that. It's very much that Witcher. It's very much a Witcher vibe. Saving the ordinary people, even though the ordinary people don't even like me.
I like
that type of vibe it is.
I like that.
Yeah, most of his charisma goes into intimidation.
Yeah, obviously. I mean, right?
No, but yeah, that's kind of where I'm at. But you're gonna find out how that curse looks and how that feels and how he's like with his very weird experiences he's already had on Sunday as well.
Yeah, I'm excited to see how our characters all interact with each other.
I always love a first session, right? Yeah. To find out how everyone interacts with each other, because everyone needs to get a feel for not only their character but also the other characters in the first place, right? And you don't know yourself. I mean, one of the fun things is I think Sam in Critical Role dropped his not accent 4 sessions in because he couldn't sustain it for the campaign.
Yeah.
Even though in the first session he made a deal of, oh, it's on, bitches, basically. I want to keep, right? You need to get a feel for your character, even if you have done a session 0, even if you need to get a feel for that. And that's always fun to see the first few sessions.
Exactly.
But yeah, so I think we should dive into our episode on urban adventures. And yeah, we will see you guys after the break. Hey everyone, and welcome to the mid-roll of the show. If you are enjoying the show and content, why not subscribe or follow the show right now on whichever platform you are listening on, so you can stay up to date with all episode releases. Then, next you can search us up on social media at DoubleDM Pod, or click the links in the info box of this episode to find our social media channels and follow us there if you want to stay up to date with all scheduling information and episode announcements. If you follow us on Twitter, you will also get a plethora of social media posts, as I spend way too much time on that platform. But hey, I have funny conversations with people like you and post memes, so that's a great thing. And lastly, if you want to help the show out even further, rate and review us on your platform. A quick 5-star rating or a few sentence review really gives us the feedback we need to improve the show and help other people find our show too. And hey, you can also just tell a friend about the fun you had learning with us and get them to listen in too. Also, we want to say that our show has open advertisement slots for you to book. Just head on over to our Twitter or email address doubledmpod@gmail.com to get into contact with us about getting your content shown on our show. Thank you for listening to this mid-roll, and now back to the show. So, Niels, right? My players in one of my games, the Phantoms of Chaos game, are returning home. Home meaning the city of Zonda, which is the hub city that I've set up for them to kind of come back to after their adventures, but also have adventure in. They're coming back from a long time outside in the wild. And there's going to be some changes for them that they realize that they've spent a lot of time away from the city. But then I also want to set up some adventures inside this city for my players to get a little bit distinction between their adventures they had for the last few months and now what they are going to have now, which is going to be an urban adventure. I already have some plans. Since this episode airs right after our session, I can talk about that, but they're going to have to kind of uncover the traces of a thievery, of a heist. One of the temples of one of my homebrew gods, the goddess of emotion, has been stolen from. They've had one of their artifacts stolen, and the players get involved in finding that artifact or in finding the culprit. Obviously, they're getting clues. We talked about mysteries already and how to do investigations a bit. We can maybe do another episode on that at some point, but that's the adventure I'm kind of setting up. For them to run around in the city, search for clues, talk to people, right?
Yeah.
They're gonna run around the city and have a little bit of maybe smaller adventures, social encounters, combat encounters that are gonna lead them to figure out a bigger mystery or a bigger investigation to who has stolen this thing and what do they want with that, because it's a powerful artifact. Yeah, that's kind of where I've set it up, right? My players are gonna have also a bit of downtime in the city, as that works perfectly. But that's kind of where I'm at with this, and I'm kind of little bit figuring out right now how to do that well, how to do urban adventures well, basically. Not necessarily the adventure I actually have planned, but talking about urban adventures. And I think that's what we want to talk about today. What is an urban adventure? How do they work? And what should you pay attention to? How do you prep them? How do you play them? From a player and DM perspective, blah, 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 blah. All of that type of stuff.
Yeah. First of all, I think when we are talking about urban encounters, I think it should be noted that they are mostly confined to a major settlement and the area around it. Maybe if there are farms around it, I would still count this towards the urban area.
I would count basically if you have a big city, right? And you have maybe a village just like a few hours out, I would even count that village still to the urban adventure.
Yeah.
Right? If you have to make a very simple binary distinction, which there isn't, but let's just say it's either an urban adventure or not. And an urban adventure is everything that basically has to do with adventure that start and let's also say play most of their time in a city.
Yeah.
I think that's the most important part. Playing most of the adventure in the city you're in.
Yeah. And I think, or in general, the urban area of the city. And I would say, you could say the urban area is everything that you can, from the city itself to up to a day's walk for and back, so that you can start in the city, venture out and come back in the same day. I would still use this in the urban area.
I would say, for example, if your adventure, for example, with my heist, if my thief gets away and runs away to another village, and that's where the conclusion of that adventure is basically part of it. My players confront him, either take him in, he flees again and gets away or something or whatever, right? That's where the conclusion of that adventure takes part. I would still call that adventure an urban adventure, even though my players might have traveled a full day to get to that village. But still, since 90% of that adventure probably played out in a city, it should still count as an urban adventure.
Yeah,
I think the main part is that really most of the story beats of that adventure, or most of the encounters and all of that stuff, kind of tie back to the city you're in, right? If the thief flees the scene and flees outside the city and just runs away, that's still just one story beat. That's just the last path the players have to take. Chase the thief outside the city and confront them outside. But still, the getaway through the city, the whole investigation, the asking of witnesses, the interrogation of suspects and all of that stuff still happened inside the city and ties back to the city. So it's still an urban adventure, obviously.
Yeah. And when you say what you want to, or you have prepared something for an urban adventure, what do you usually need for an urban adventure?
What do I need? Well, for this game, I have obviously a city. I need the city. I need it as a backdrop. I need it as an environment, and I need it well. I need a very detailed description of the city. It doesn't have to be picture perfect, obviously, but I want a very detailed description of the city. For example, if your city is big and has districts, I would like a description of every district, of everything in that district. That can be, if those districts are super huge, for example, if your are going more and more into modern or sci-fi adventures instead of fantasy, there could be that you have metropolises that are basically 100 million citizens in one city, and there could be each district is as big as some of the biggest cities today. And then these districts might have different governing types, might be controlled by different people, right? You need to have a very detailed description of the city and its parts and its players, basically. You need a lot, I think, for an urban adventure, even though it's all kind of defined under one roof called the city you're playing in.
Yeah.
There's a lot attached to that. It isn't just, hey, I have a fantasy city, I have 3 paragraphs on it, I can run an urban adventure. You can do that if you're good enough at that. But, for example, I wouldn't count myself good enough at that to build a whole urban adventure with only 3 paragraphs about a whole city, because I would then have to improvise way too much of the stuff that I cannot improvise well, like city district descriptions, city district people, and all of that stuff would be way too much for me. I would need more input, and I think a lot of people do as well.
Yeah, I think especially for urban adventures, my prep for the first couple of sessions is so huge because I completely plan out the city, their descriptions, who is in there, who's in charge, and all of that. I write that down so I don't get those facts mixed up in session. And then in session 1 and 2, I make notes and adjust things a bit. But overall, the planning for the first 2 sessions is immense because of the complexity a city itself provides. The city is super complex, and that needs to show, at least for me in my notes.
Yeah, I think this is kind of how it works for nearly all adventures. If you have adventures that span multiple sessions or longer campaigns, right, the first few sessions are gonna have to have you make more prep because, right, you need to lay the groundwork you need to build on. You need that groundwork. You need it everywhere. Is it an exploration adventure or an urban adventure or a dungeon adventure? You need that groundwork somewhere. And I think you build it. But in the city especially, an urban adventure basically says drop your players into this huge, giant, freaking playground and let them play around, right? If you drop your players into a dungeon, that is a very confined structure in our opinion. There you do not need to prep for too much divergence in the player's path because they are taking the path the dungeon leads them. But in the city, they can really go into every direction and should find something else in that direction.
Exactly.
Right? If your players want to go into and talk to people in the slums or something, that's completely different than when they want to go to the regent district, where the regent, the king or whatever lives, and all of his advisors live, and all of these people that work in the banks or whatever, or at the higher courts work. There's a very huge difference in how those 2 parts of the city will play out. Again, they can also happen in a dungeon, obviously, but a city is a very huge, open, free, and complex, as Niels said, playground for your players to be dropped into. And having a lot of knowledge about that playground will help you to make it feel like it actually is available to the players.
Yeah, and I usually also write down how the city is structured itself and how it's organized, and all of the steps that we talked about, how to create good settlements and cities in our episode 79, I think it was.
79 or something like that, but yeah, that episode is definitely needed for this episode because you need to have a good city to run a good urban adventure.
Exactly.
It relies on the backdrop, which is the city or the playground you're playing in. Right, obviously you can create a good adventure in a very basic city. You can also create a good city with a basic adventure. But if those 2 parts play well together, that's where you want to be. And you can cut that prep into 2 parts, prepping the city and prepping the adventure in that city.
Yeah.
Those 2 parts are not necessarily linked, but they also should be linked, right? You do not have to do one before the other. You can do which one you ever like first, but you need both to really create that juicy adventure that you probably crave. When you came looking for this episode or something, or you're listening and think about, I want to run an urban adventure, you're probably thinking about this thing that only works when both of these parts play together well. And you need to make them play together well. And here I know this question is ambiguous, but how do you make a city as an environment and backdrop play together well with any kind of adventure you want to run in that city?
Yeah, I think a big part is the NPCs and how they interact with the party or with each other within the city. Because it makes the city feel more alive and therefore makes it easier or better for you to interweave the adventure with the city itself because it feels organic.
Yeah. Quick quick question on that. Is it still an urban adventure if the city has been basically left? If it's an abandoned city, no matter how huge it is it still an urban adventure?
I wouldn't say so.
Okay.
Because I think the urban adventure or the urban part is something that relates to a city and not just a collection of buildings. I think a city is just more than just the buildings.
Yeah.
Because the people in the city are what makes the city that it is. They are the ones that govern the city. They are the ones that organize and structure the city, or don't, or whatever. They are the ones that populate the city. They are the ones that live in the streets, in the houses, in wherever. Those are the ones that completely fill the city with life. And I think you can't have any urban encounters without having people to interact with in any way, shape, or form. You could basically say an abandoned city could be considered a dungeon crawl to some extent, because as we defined dungeons, it is basically a confined structure of some sorts. And an abandoned city is definitely that. But yeah, I wouldn't say an abandoned city or an adventure in an abandoned city is necessarily an urban encounter or an urban adventure.
I definitely agree, right? The city as a structure doesn't make the urban adventure. The city as a structure is the environment the adventure is set in.
Exactly.
But the environment doesn't make the adventure. The adventure is made by stories being told, by plots, by scenarios, whatever you want to call it, really. And those only happen when your players interact with the environment and other people in that environment.
Yeah.
Right? Obviously, a plot can be that your players are supposed to investigate this abandoned city, but that's not an urban adventure. I think urban really relies on the people that live in that city, as you said, right?
Yeah.
An abandoned city is just a backdrop. It's an environment. It's a hazard, maybe, but it doesn't give that feeling of basically adventuring in a place where a lot of people live, work, exist. It just doesn't give that feeling because obviously the people are missing. It's missing one of the key components. So yeah, I definitely agree. Even if the city isn't obviously fully abandoned, but just destroyed, and there are a few clans in that city that fight for its territory, right? In an apocalyptic setting or whatever. I still wouldn't call that an urban adventure. I think urban really is in a big environment that is filled with life, that is filled with maybe subtle dangers. You could say it like that. Not even necessarily dangers, but subtle challenges. I think actually that's one of the fun things for urban adventures for me, that there are subtle challenges that just do not realize. Because urban adventures, obviously, you are at the marketplace and you need to find someone that is, this marketplace is very crowded and someone in this marketplace has something for you, or that's your suspect or whatever. And they're running away through the marketplace. Now try to make your way through the masses to them or something. Right? The subtle challenge, right? It isn't a subtle challenge, but it's just something different. You do not get that in an abandoned city, even though there are maybe a few clans fighting in that city. You just do not get that. And I think that is actually one of the core essences of urban adventures for me. That marketplace scene where filled with life, and the challenge actually doesn't sound that hard, but it's fun because you obviously do not want to endanger the people around you, so you can't just throw a fucking fireball into the masses because you would endanger, maybe kill, and definitely injure a lot of civilians. And I think that's where the fun part comes in of urban adventures. You're surrounded by a lot of civilians, by a lot of common folk that do not have anything to do with your adventure, that can pose help, threats, challenges, barriers, or whatever in your adventures. And I think that's where the fun comes from.
Yeah, and that's just led me to another thing that you, I think, need to have a good and fun, engaging urban adventure is some sort of code of law. Some written down rules the party should abide to. Because if they don't, they get caught by whatever, or do something against this code of law and try not to get caught in the process. Because in the fucking wilds, you can throw fireball anywhere you like, but in a city, it's not a good idea to throw fireball within the fucking marketplace, because suddenly 60 people are dead and you have murder charges brought upon you. And try to work that out a bit is important, at least in my opinion, to see how the city or the city guard or whatever instance you have that enforces law, or however this instance works with someone who is breaking the law. And especially in fantasy settings, and the bigger the city gets, the more options the law enforcement has to come or to engage in certain situations. And the more they have heard about adventuring parties or have had interactions with adventuring parties and have means to combat those adventuring parties if they go south.
Yeah. I really feel like that having that code of conduct, the code of law or whatever, really adds to that urban adventure feeling, right? It's another one of these smaller challenges you have to just deal with, but that work for both parties that are part of that adventure. Again, if I'm talking about that heist adventure, it's because that's what was on my mind right now. But obviously that heister obviously broke the law already. But that also means that my players, if they want to catch him fair and square, they are not allowed to break the law, because if they do, they're also criminals. So it doesn't work that way. But again, that thief also doesn't want to break too many laws, because if he gets caught, that's bad for him. Obviously, he's already stolen something very important, so he already has a long prison sentence, or might even have his head rolling. The more, if he now gets into another encounter with the guards, that he just risks capture. Right? He also wants to go around the law and basically be a law-abiding citizen after his heist. So I definitely agree that having some idea of the laws and code of conduct and what is allowed and what is not allowed, even just common sense, obviously, you don't have to make a big code of conduct or law, or you do not have to do that. Just use your common sense. Killing people is bad. So obviously, if someone endangers people, that's bad. That's probably somewhere in your law. Your guards will probably not respond kindly to someone that draws a sword on someone, because that can lead to them being injured. That leads to death, and death is bad. And injury is bad as well, and that means also threatening is bad. And obviously stealing is bad. Someone's property is not your own, so stealing is also bad. And that common sense is already enough to have enough code of conduct, code of law to actually work that into the adventure. But it definitely is part of the adventure. It should be felt that there are guards in the city, that there are other factions in the city, be it guards, be it high mages or whatever. But there are a lot of people in the city, and a lot of people means a lot of smaller concerns, smaller problems that need to be somewhat generalized in a law, in a code of conduct. In maybe, for example, no one is allowed to carry weapons aside from the guard in the city. How do your players go around that problem? Or do they abide by it? Hey, works as well, right?
Exactly.
And that needs to be somewhat felt. You obviously do not need to permit your players in every city that they should carry weapons, but there needs to be a reason for that. But that can just be, well, there's a lot of crime running around in the city, and the guards thought that the best way to make sure that there are fewer crimes committed is just by banning weapons and basically locking everyone up that owns a weapon.
Yeah.
And maybe that works, maybe it doesn't work, but that's how that urban adventure has some minor challenges to it that basically influence the adventure, even though they aren't part of the adventure itself.
Yeah, and I think you touched on a very important thing there as well that you should keep in mind is the factions. And having different factions and different ways those factions interact with each other also makes the city more livable and gives you more options to create fun and interesting encounters, depending on for what faction this adventure is. If you work for the guard to catch, for example, someone who stole this valuable artifact from the temple, the adventure plays completely different if you are working for the Thieves Guild, who is trying to steal that artifact. And a way those two factions interact with each other, the Thieves Guild and the guards, completely changes the tone of the adventure depending on what side you are on.
Yeah.
Or if you are on a side in general. If you aren't on a side, this is completely different as well. Just the interaction being there between those two factions makes it completely different.
Yeah, as we both touched on factions now, really, I think thinking about the people, right? How are they organized? Are there guilds, for example? Are there unions of workers? Whatever type, who governs the city, as we already talked about. But what are the core beliefs of people as well? So are the city wealthy or not? All of these type of questions that make you understand your people in your city better. Because another thing that influences urban adventures, but actually isn't part of the urban adventure, are civilian concerns. The people around your players. For example, if your players in a murder investigation or in a heist investigation, go to a store owner that might have some information. One of the basic things is maybe, for example, most store owners in the city are poor, or the people in the city are generally very poor. That store owner might only be able to give information for the right amount of price. They know that they can maybe get a little bit of money here. Maybe the players go with that or don't. But that store owner first interest might be, I want that money. Not necessarily because they're a money-loving store owner, but just because obviously they're poor. They want to feed their fucking kids. Or or maybe they do not like to talk to cops. And when the players say, we were sent by the guards, they would say, no, I don't want to talk to the guard, because maybe the guard is corrupt and is very much punching down at these store owners and restricting them or whatever. Maybe there's a history with that store owner or whatever. But thinking about the civilian problems that concern the normal civilians in the city will help you understand how they interact with the players. And that's very important for an urban adventure. It is based on interaction in the city, and you need to base it on the people living in the city. And you can only do that if you know what their concerns are as well. Maybe the city is currently sieged. The people are probably scared. The people, again, might not have enough food because obviously their supply lines have been cut off. Interacting with these people is going to be very different than in a wealthy, well-fed city. There's a huge difference here, and you need to pay attention to it. So that's definitely one thing as well. And I think one of the fun things with that is, especially also with you mentioning factions, and again, the Thieves Guild versus the Guard, is you need to place stories in your city. We said in our city episode, but those stories should, again, be felt. Overarching stories that are not necessarily influencing the plot the players are going to face, but are felt. Thieves versus guards, right? It might be a lot of smaller thievery. That there's a thieves guild in town, and they control certain parts of the city where the guards do not come because the guards are too scared because they might get murdered in the streets. And then you have this divide of the thieves guild and the guards on both sides, and this is a very felt distinction. That story of that fight between these two factions is felt within everywhere of the city, because on one side you have guards, on the other side you have cutthroats and thieves, and maybe not even cutthroats or thieves, but just people that do not want the guard around because the guard are corrupt or something, and they just want freedom and anarchy, or not anarchy, but just freedom from these people. That's a distinction that should be felt. That's a story that, while it might not impact the plotline the players go, should be felt by the players as they adventure along the plotline.
Yeah, and one thing that makes them, or that conveys that feeling of other stories taking place at the same time, is the amount of information that you can give out through multiple sources within the city. A town crier. And in general, everything is a bit faster in a city than on the countryside or in the wilds, because there are so many people acting on the information they got, being it the right information or just a hoax. But they still act on the information that they have. And it's a difference if 2 people act on those information or 200.
Yeah.
And this is something that you should keep in mind, that if something happens, a day later, this rumor has spread throughout the city, maybe. Depending on what type of city you have and how these people interact with the city and whatever. But it's a possibility that rumors spread like wildfire. And this is a way you can show your players that there's still something else going on in the city that is not their main plotline that they are following.
Yeah, for sure. I think another thing for urban adventures, right, we said that in our city episode, have points of interest. I think that ties in as very well with all of what we said before now. These points of interest, they should also obviously be part of that adventure your players are gonna have. Have them go to points of interest in the city. That could be a temple. For my urban adventure, it's obviously a temple. But they will also maybe go to a ball hall, because, hey, the fun part of this is that this thief is actually very cocky and invites the guard that is gonna follow him, the investigator that is supposed to take on his case, to a ball part, to a masquerade ball. So my players are also gonna go to a theater or a ball hall or something. That's also a point of interest. And while these 2 points of interest are filled with with important NPCs, if you have another point of interest for your game, maybe a merchant's guild or a thieves guild or a guard barrack, have one important NPC there for your players to meet. For each point of interest, have some NPC there to meet your players, because the players are gonna go there to meet someone or to investigate. Having an NPC there is gonna be a lot better for your players to interact with than just hearing, well, yes, you can't enter the point of interest right now because it's closed. That's not fun, obviously not. But having an NPC that your players can interact with, again, ties back to the city. Is an NPC that lives in the city or is in the city right now, and that ties back into it. So having that point of interest tied to an important NPC is very good. Have important NPCs at your important locations prepared. And I'm talking about all the important locations in your city. Obviously, you do not have to have an NPC description with, I don't know, a moral compass and goals and secrets and whatever for all locations? Obviously not. But if you have, I don't know, 10 points of interest in your city, which is a lot, and then have at each location one NPC that is gonna be there to meet the players once they go there for whatever reason. That is just gonna enable your players to interact and engage with that location and that NPC. They're gonna get information, which is very important in adventures. They're gonna find something out. Maybe they engage in a fight or whatever, but it is an engaging point now. It's an engaging situation, and you want these situations.
And another thing that you, I think, need to have to enable your players to find these points of interest, other than just their visually being there, is a way to give out information. And I think a good way to do that is doing through social hubs, like we talked in episode 45, I think it was. But those are places where people come together and talk. And this is a way or a place where your players can get information.
Have tavern prepared. Have taverns prepared, because you need to have them prepared, because those are the parts where players will probably go first. Even if they don't have any adventure, they're gonna go to a tavern, because obviously players are often adventurers. They often go from town to town, solving props, or from place to place. They're gonna look for a tavern. And even though that might now sound weird because the tavern isn't going to be part of the adventure, it's still an important part to the city and your players. Have taverns prepared, because players are going to go to them most of the time. Basically 99% of the time, players are going to go to taverns.
Yeah, and if they don't have a house in that city or some other residence, this most of the time becomes basically their HQ.
Their base of operation.
Exactly. And therefore, this tavern is especially important, because this is where most of the planning of the party takes place. And if you have a interesting tavern or a fun tavern to engage with, they are more likely to have fun doing exactly that, what they want to do in the first place, but with more background and more interesting environment, or in a more interesting environment. And maybe a way to give out information, to lure someone out using that information, to get information or whatever. It's just a good place for your players to communicate with the city and your world itself.
And especially if your players are going to come to that tavern often. For example, if the urban adventure takes 5 to 6 days in that city, they're going to go each and every evening to that tavern, to the same tavern, because why not? It's simple, it's easy, it works, perfect. But I think that actually brings us to a very good point about urban adventures that I find very important, is familiarity. Especially in part of that location before. If your whole campaign is about urban adventures, if you have a whole urban campaign, your players are probably grew up in the city. They know the place. They know people. And I think that's very important. I think knowing this location you're in an urban adventure, as long as you've been in that location for some time, should play a role in your adventure. Your players know the city. They know the streets. They know people. They know where to get stuff. Especially if they've been longer in the city, right? In your first urban adventure, it could also very much be turn it on its head. They do not have any familiarity with the place and need to find their way through the city that way. Just as good. But I think having a grip on how familiar your players, or the characters rather, should be with that city is very good in understanding how to make that adventure in that city feel better for your players.
Yeah.
Because if their players are traveling through the world and solving dungeons, they've never been in that dungeon before. Obviously not. Because if they've been there, they know all the secrets. And that's why you don't need to play with familiarity there. But in a city, there's a lot of questions on how familiar are my players with this city? How much time did they spend here? How much understanding do they have of the city grounds? Do they know a shortcut? Do they know have they been to the sewers and know how to navigate down there? Maybe they can find shortcuts. Maybe they know people that help them. They know at the market there's an old man that sits there playing dragon chess with people all day long, and he sees basically everything that happens, or whatever, right? Those are informations that your players should have if their characters have familiarity with the city. And that's why, for example, Shadowrun has this, even though that system, I have a love-hate relationship with it, this contacts thing, or whatever, where other systems where you have that. That's very good. D&D doesn't have that. Other fantasy systems do not have that. Some do, some don't, doesn't matter. But having some way of knowing how familiar players are with the city and then granting them benefits for that should happen, I think.
Oh, yeah.
Let them know NPCs. Let them know a shortcut. Let them know a spot, basically. Do that, because that's just gonna add to immersion. Your players are like, to all the people that have lived in cities their life, you know your city, or at least the part of your city, very well. I know where I can go to get my groceries. I know how to whatever, right? I know how to get to my friend's place. I know the subway tunnels of Berlin. I know wherever I am in Berlin, I know which subways and buses to take to get home.
Exactly.
Because I know the city that well. And that should reflect to your players. You should reward them if their character has been in the city for some time. Because they are just gonna feel like that information, that knowledge, that time spent here has mattered to now using it in the adventure. And your players are gonna love that moment when they are the one that have information about the city that is gonna lead to them successfully solving their adventure.
Yeah, and I think, like you mentioned, if you start with an urban adventure and everyone grew up in the same city, build in some NPCs from their backstory as contexts they can rely on or use for further adventures to be had in the city.
Yeah.
And if you just, like you said, completely turn the familiarity part on your on the set, have them create those connections. This happens naturally with while your players interact with people, but it's a good part or a good thing to keep in mind that please let this happen. It just binds your players more to that place. It gives them a feeling of accomplishment if they have established connections that maybe no one else has to that degree, because then maybe someone comes to them for help to act on those connections they have.
Yeah.
Maybe they helped out a noble in a pickle, and now they have them not necessarily as a friend, but they each owe themselves a favor. And then you can call that in, or whatever else you want to do with that.
Yeah, 100% true, right? My players, for example, met outside the city, actually, a succubus, has shape-shifting abilities, and fled her infernal family's politics in the infernal realms or whatever, and went to the material plane to just chill, to have fun, to live life, to not care about the things happening at home. And she does that. And they met her, and then they met her in the city again. And now she lives in that city. And she has spent a lot of time in that city. And she's this playful party girl, but very expert, obviously, on social interactions. She knows people. She can read people. She understands them. And my players might not have spent a lot of time in the city yet, but they have this NPC connection with someone that knows the city, especially the party and festival side of the city, which this city has a lot of, which is gonna play a part in their heist investigation. So they have an NPC that they know will help them and that can help them in that regard. And I'm gonna make a point that this NPC is gonna show up and help my players and show them basically how the city in that regard works, so they can understand. But just that part, because without her, my players will be left to figure it out themselves. While that might be fun, it might also be fun to use my NPC to help my players and have that interaction, that roleplay interaction, and that interaction that makes the urban adventure what it is.
And I think that is a good major benefit of running urban adventures, is that you have multiple attack angles on the same problem. You can, most of the time in a city, go about a problem in complete different ways and still achieve the goal you set out to do. And I think this is where urban adventures shine, because in a city you can exactly do that. Like you said, your players can interact with the NPC that you gave them, or they can try to figure it out themselves. There are two different ways that maybe even lead to the same outcome, but through different means.
Yeah.
I just love how urban adventures shine in that regard. Just having the plethora of options to choose from.
It's a very huge playground that allows for everyone to do what they want, because all the options are there, more or less. You can talk to an NPC. You do not have to. You can also just do it alone. You can use the underground sewers, or you can, I don't know, fly above the city buildings. You can climb onto the city buildings and watch from there, or whatever. But it's just a huge playground with so many intricate and complex parts to it that it just allows for basically everything to work in some way. And again, I also have to say, because D&D is combat, or a lot of it is combat, city combats are just fucking cool.
Yeah.
Fighting in narrow alleyways, having problems, making sure that no civilians get hurt, making sure that you do not alert the guard to it. There's a lot of cool challenges to urban combats, aside from just combat, which I very much enjoy.
Chase scenes are perfect for city encounters, because, like you said, you have narrow alleyways, crowded marketplaces, and you have to dart through all of that. Amazing.
You have so much stuff to do in a chase scene in a city. Chase scenes are so cool in urban adventures because there's so many possibilities of what you can do. A chase scene atop the rooftops, then into the sewers, in the darkness, then through narrow alleyways, boxes fall behind you, through the crowded marketplace, into someone's building, running through their kitchen or whatever, and there's just so much cool things you can do with that if you let your imagination flow. But generally, I think there are a lot of other urban encounters, right? For example, we talked about mysteries a lot already. Also, we kind of scratched the faction conflict with the factions of thieves guilds or versus guards, mages versus divine or whatever. There's a lot of faction conflicts that you can play out. I think that's how you keep urban adventures from getting stale, especially if your campaign revolves just around one big city. Have a lot of different types of stories in that all kind of relate back to the city core. And the city core isn't the city center, but the core of the city. This city is a mage city. So that's the core. There's a lot of mages around. There's a lot of magic in the city. And then, for example, you could have external threats that threaten the city from the outside. An invading army. I don't know. The zombie apocalypse outside or whatever. Plague could be a very cool adventure in the city, right? Suddenly everyone gets sick and you need, because cities were these hubs for plagues. And as they are still today with COVID, that works well as well in D&D or whatever TTRPG you want to play an urban adventure in. That's a cool story beat. And there's so much more stuff you can do. And the thing is, you need to pay attention to it getting stale because the background stays the city. There's a lot of different backgrounds in that city. There's a lot of different parts where you can play adventures. At the docks, maybe in the outside districts of the walls, in the upper districts, in the slums, whatever, in the mage district, in the temple districts, in the market districts. There's a lot of different districts that have very much different adventures attached to them, but the city itself stays the same. So you need to watch out for your adventure getting stale. And you do that, I think, best with throwing as many different stories in that work with that city core that you decide at the beginning of your city prep.
Yeah, and I think another way to keep an urban adventure from getting stale is perfect in a city to change up the pace of your storytelling, because you can use different environment factors, being it the amount of people or whatever else there might be, to change up the pace in which the story develops. You can control how fast the rumors spread, or you as a table per se can discuss and say how fast the rumor spreads. Maybe the characters help spreading that rumor to get some leverage on someone that the society is getting restless or whatever. And this also helps that because changing the pace between this is a hardcore, super tense chase scene to now we have a week of downtime and can just chill, shop and whatever. And this comparison between those two is pretty easy to do in a city because of the amount of tools you have at your disposal in a city.
And the amount of stuff your players just can do, right?
Exactly.
Just as with my adventure, my players are going to come back. I'm going to give them a little bit of downtime. What do they want to do in that time? Do they want to maybe take on a small job on the side? Do they want to learn something? Do they want to work on their own projects? Whatever they want to do, they can do. And then, boom, let's go adventuring again. But this time in the city. And that's fun. One other thing that I have as an advice to spice up your cities and your city adventures. Have rumors in that city.
Oh, yeah.
Because cities are the breeding grounds of rumors. They spread everywhere, but cities are where they develop. Cities are where they work. And if your players hear rumors or start spreading rumors or are the target of rumors, those should be felt. Tell your players rumors. Let your players hear when they want to go to a tavern, rumors. If they are in the marketplace, let them hear rumors. The newspaper might have picked up a rumor and investigated it. Maybe the town crier is spreading rumors for whatever reason. You can and should do a lot with rumors. They are fun to create, very simple to create because you can create them as someone would actually create a rumor. Just make up a random fact about something and sell it truthfully. And then just make it spread like wildfire. Attach bit by bit. Something like the thing is, I don't know, the queen is pregnant. And then I heard she is pregnant with a devil's child or whatever. That's an extreme. But that's a rumor, first of all. The queen hasn't said she is pregnant, so that rumor developed somewhere. Maybe someone from the inside has information on that. That's spread. Then someone says, but I think the queen doesn't have a child with a king. She did bastard child, basically. Okay, so that's someone taking something onto that rumor to make it bigger. And that is just how these things develop. And you should have them. Tell your players if they're going to someone and says, how are you doing? They might talk about the rumors. Maybe someone is always disputing the rumors or believing them blindly. Maybe someone hasn't heard them, even though everyone else has heard them. And the players go up and say, have you heard the rumor? And they say no. But they should be somewhat of a center part of the game when you play urban adventures. They should be felt everywhere. They should be influential. They should be absurd. They should be believable. They should be everything in between, basically.
Yeah, and one thing that I like to do with rumors is have rumors about the party reach the party itself. For example, on the road, some merchant picked up a story from a different city about this adventuring party that did something. Just keeping it vague here. And then this rumor spreads throughout this next city this merchant visited. Your party, being the target or the main actor of that rumor, then visits the city and gets told these rumors. And they recognize that this is something that they did, but maybe blown out of proportion or played down to a completely irrelevant level.
I find that is very interesting because if you tell your players a rumor about themselves, they're gonna react in some way, right? But the most fun is when you basically tell them what they did, but it attributed to someone else.
Yeah.
Your players are gonna make sure that they are known for what they did next time. It's so fun. But obviously, if that makes sense, so maybe it can be bad, it can be good rumors, right? Your players might hear, I've heard of this adventuring party that robs merchants, because your players one time made this corrupt merchant pay for his crimes against a little town or something, and that corrupt merchant went on to tell everyone that this adventuring party is obviously stealing from merchants on the road, and everyone needs to be safe, and everyone believes it, and stuff like that. And your players are like, well, that rumor is about us, but we do not want everyone to know, because they believe we are merchant-robbing bastards or something, even though we aren't. And yeah, I definitely agree. Rumors about the party are very much fun, especially if they work. And especially if they are definitely not entirely correct. Because that just means your players are gonna react to it like, oh, wow, oh, no, that's wrong. Oh, that works in our favor. Oh, no, we need to, whatever, right? It's so much fun.
Exactly. And this is something that you can perfectly do in cities because of the nature of a city.
They are breeding grounds for rumors.
Exactly.
So, I think we talked a little bit about urban adventures. I have a little bit more information on what I should do from you, and also talked a little bit about what I would want to do and now can do that as well for myself. So that works very well. We haven't even talked about everything, I think, but we talked about most of it. And I think I hope people have found something that is interesting to them that might help them in creating their next urban adventure. And with that, I think, Niels, you can send us off for today's episode.
All right. Then, as per usual, you can find us on Twitter and Instagram at DoubleDMPod, or you can visit our website at www.doubledm.com. And we also have a Ko-Fi if you would like to check that out. And if you like the show, enjoy the episodes, please leave a rating on your favorite podcasting listening platform of your choice. It really helps the show out. And with that, thank you for listening. Hear you on the next one, and bye-bye.
Bye-bye.